to supplement the government's very limited public consultation process and facilitate an open discussion about Disney's draft EIA, its gaps, and how Disney might address identified deficiencies. Our last meeting on April 15th had over 100 participants who engaged in thorough and meaningful conversation about their concerns with Disney's draft EIA. So for those of you who are joining us again, we say thank you for being here once again. And for those joining for the first time, welcome and please do participate. I want to take a minute to lay out the ground rules for our Zoom meeting. First, in Zoom, if your real name does not show, please rename yourself by pressing the participants button, hitting more next to your name, and select rename. We would not want to refer to everyone tonight as iPhone. Second, we will mute everyone's video and audio, except for the speakers, in order to assure adequate bandwidth throughout the duration of this meeting. Third, please feel free to use the chat function for any comments or questions you may have, or to share any links or resources you may find useful to these discussions. We will start with brief presentations from independent experts outlining their analyses of the inadequacy of Disney's draft EIA. We will then proceed with an open discussion period. We encourage you to share your thoughts and questions on the inadequacy of the draft EIA, and we will do our best to give everyone a chance to speak who wish to do so. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raise your hand feature by selecting reactions, the button at the bottom of your screen, and you will be called on by the moderator. I am pleased to introduce Sam Duncombe, the fierce Sam Duncombe. She is the Executive Director of Re-Earth and a partner with the Stop Disney Last Chance campaign, who will be moderating our discussion tonight. Sam?
Okay, thank you, Rashima. Good evening and happy Earth Day to all of you. I'm Sam Duncombe, Executive Director of Re-Earth and one of the partners in the Stop Disney Last Chance for Lighthouse Point campaign. For over 2 years, we've been communicating our concerns with Disney about Lighthouse Point, the fact that it's in a proposed marine protected area and that it deserves an EIA that respected science. In fact, Disney has stated that their intent is to approach the Lighthouse Point project with the same level of environmental stewardship and sensitivity it brings to other Disney projects around the world. We believe that as an iconic American company that is proposing a development primarily for Americans, Disney would follow the same standards in the Bahamas as it does for its proposed developments in Florida, California, or elsewhere. However, numerous independent experts have come to the same conclusion. The current draft EIA has serious deficiencies and would not be considered acceptable in Disney's own hometown. We hope to identify and discuss some of these gaps tonight so that we can all submit meaningful comments to Disney and the government. While we are eager to discuss all of your concerns tonight, I would like to remind everyone that the reason we are here is because we do not have all the answers. As it stands, Disney's draft EIA does not provide the public with all of the information needed to decide whether or not this project is a good deal for the Bahamas. Our goal is to bring awareness to outstanding questions and issues so that Disney can improve and supplement their draft EIA. A reminder that the period for public comment ends on May 7th. Please get your comments in. We strongly encourage you to submit your comments to the government and Disney. Information on how to submit comments is being dropped in the chat now, or you can visit stopdisney.com for specific instructions. This is a major decision for the future of Eleuthera and the Bahamas. Our campaign petition has attracted more than 442,000 supporters. The world is watching this process, and we believe Disney when it says it will not proceed with the development unless it's environmentally responsible. As our partner Casuarina McKinney said at the official consultation on April 8th, irrespective of your view of Disney's current proposal, we can agree that Disney and the government need to conduct a science-based EIA with meaningful public participation as a basis for a rational decision about such a major project. Our goal with these extended public consultations is to further the discussions of the key areas where this EIA needs to be improved so that Disney, the government, and the public can make a sound judgment about the future of Lighthouse Point. We invited the government and Disney experts to participate in tonight's meeting. Disney refused to participate in last week's meeting. This week, we have received no response from the government or from Disney. If there are any Disney or government associates here, please identify yourselves in the chat. We welcome you and hope you will engage in a productive discussion with us tonight. We're going to start off the conversation with presentations from Dr. Thomas Garreau, President of the Global Coral Reef Alliance, and a report from the world-renowned Woods Hole Group on climate change and sea level rise. First up, we have Dr. Thomas Garreau. And I've known Dr. Tom Garreau for at least 20 years, and it's a pleasure to have him working with us again. Dr. Garreau is the president of Global Coral Reef Alliance and the chief scientist at Blue Regeneration. He is a biochemist, was educated in Jamaican schools, and holds degrees from MIT, Caltech, and Harvard. He is president and founder of the Global Coral Reef Alliance. He has dived on coral reefs across the Caribbean, Pacific, Indian Ocean, and Southeast Asia for more than 60 years. He has published more than 150 papers and written and edited books on scientific photography, marine ecosystem restoration, soil fertility restoration, and climate stabilization. He is co-inventor of the hotspot method for predicting coral bleaching from satellite data and of the BioRock method for regenerating marine ecosystems and eroding coastlines. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Garreau.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm the president of the Global Coral Reef Alliance, and I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you a few slides, so you won't have to look at me. You'll get to see real pictures. So hold on, share screen, 1 second. Yes. Okay. My grandfather and my father took the first underwater photographs of the Bahamas 73 years ago in 1948. And so we're very aware of how the reefs used to be. And they photographed the reefs in Lyford Key and Rose Island before there was any development in those places. And they were magnificent reefs. So we know that the situation with coral reefs in the Bahamas, like around the Caribbean, has never been worse than it is now. They're clobbered by climate change, by pollution, by new diseases, and a lot of issues. Now, this is a picture of how it was in 1948. This is actually the first high-quality underwater color photograph, and it's from the Bahamas. I'm going to talk really about Lighthouse Point and why it's special. These are aerial pictures from the Disney EIA. And as you can see, it's a very beautiful place. It's got these pristine saltwater ponds that are major migratory bird habitats. And right offshore, as you see in these aerial pictures, are live, healthy coral reefs. And there's some of the best left in the Caribbean. And what's really unique about the site and why it is the most important conservation priority in Eleuthera is, as you can see on this map, it's right down in the very southern corner of Eleuthera. It is the only reef in Eleuthera that is upcurrent from all human influence. It sticks right out into deep, cold, clean Atlantic waters. It's as clean as waters as you'll find anywhere in the Bahamas. And that's why the reefs are in such good condition. because it's up current from all people. All the reefs that are down current in New Providence and northern Eleuthera are covered with algae and are in not very good condition. I know that from having dived all around the Bahamas and worked on reef issues. So these are some of the best reefs left in the Bahamas, and they're certainly the best in Eleuthera because they're the only ones that are up current from all the people. So they're really the top marine conservation priority in all of Eleuthera, and that's why that area was designated to be a marine protected area right away. As I say, it's one of the Bahamas' top conservation priorities without any question. And this map here shows the proposed Disney dock and pier. I'm not going to discuss their proposal. There's one thing that they've done that is a very good thing is that they're proposing not to do any dredging. They're proposing to have a very long pier and be out in deep water. So that avoids the dredging that has destroyed reefs every place they've put in cruise ship ports and done dredging. So that they plan to avoid here, but it's right in the heart of the marine protected area. Now, what they're proposing to do, because this is an area that sticks right out into the waves, every time a hurricane hits, the sand gets washed up on the shore or washed out into deep water. It drops off very steeply, so there's not much sand here. The sand can't accumulate here because when a hurricane hits, the wave energy is focused on the point, and so it's mostly hard bottom, hard limestone rock with only a thin layer of sand. So that poses a problem there because, as I say, there's not much natural sand, and therefore what they're proposing to do is to bring in sand landfill. They plan to create a beach. There's just not enough sand there for the number of people that they propose to bring in. And so what they're proposing to do is remove whatever rocks are there, bring in sand. They don't say where it's going to come from, but it obviously has to come from someplace. So that's not mentioned in the EIA. The sand just magically appears. And they propose to fill in beaches on both sides of Lighthouse Point above the high tide mark. They don't plan to put it below the low tide mark because they know it's going to wash away. So they plan to pile the sand up above the high tide mark to have a kind of beach above the high water mark. Now, we know what's going to happen in the first hurricane to all that sand that's piled up on the beach. It's going to wash off into the water. And that's the method by which South Florida killed all their reefs in Dade County and Broward County. They brought in landfill, they dumped it on the beach so they could get more tourists there. That sand in the first storms migrated offshore, smothered and killed the reefs. The reefs died, and then the reefs were why the sand had been there in the first place. So once they entered that process, they entered a never-ending cycle of having to dump more sand that constantly washes away. Now there's no more sand to dredge left in South Florida. So this is where what would happen here. I mean, any hurricane, that sand is going to be washed away. And where it's going to be washed is right onto the reef itself. So this is a large area. They propose to build these large artificial beaches on both sides of Lighthouse Point with rock barriers to keep them from washing away. But as I say, in a storm, that's going to end offshore. And where it's going to end up is on the reefs offshore. And these circles that I show on this map are the areas where the Disney Environmental Impact Assessment found live staghorn and elkhorn coral reefs. Those are the reefs, the corals that we used to have all around the Caribbean in shallow water. They built the beaches, they provided the habitat for the fish, and they're gone almost every place. There's hardly any of them left in the Caribbean. They're severely endangered. And all of these circles show areas where there's live elkhorn and staghorn corals still growing. And that's because the waters are so clean and pure at this particular site. These corals need high wave energy to keep fresh, and they're right near shore. That's where that sand is going to wash right onto and kill those last precious corals, which are the most important, some of the most important left in the Bahamas. The dashed line you see in this image is the 500 feet from the shore, and they didn't do any surveys beyond that, but that's where the good reef is, out in deeper water in front where the high coral cover is, because I say the shallow areas get really hammered by hurricanes, and so the corals there get damaged. In deeper water, the corals there, it's extremely clear blue waters. The corals there go extremely deep, perhaps some of the deepest anywhere in the Caribbean. So that makes this area really a very precious location. And it's right where any sand that's dumped on the beach is going to wash and it's going to smother those reefs. So that's a serious consideration. If we zoom out a little bit, those circles are where that reef is, right near shore next to the beaches they plan to fill in. But there are all these deep reefs here that they didn't survey in the EIA. And that's where some of the best reef in the Bahamas is, because it drops off very deep and there's lots of coral down there that was not surveyed. Another place where I marked in the X here is off the end of that point. They say there's no grouper spawning sites or places that need to be protected, but I tell you that is almost certainly probably the most important grouper and spawning site in all of Eleuthera, because exactly what groupers look for. They look for a promontory sticking out into the currents with the waves washing straight on, and they're coming, in this case, from the southwest, from the right up. They wash right up along that shore, and that's an area that needs critical protection, those deep reefs. So there's going to be a lot of issues here. Let me just mention here that they're not planning to dredge. This is Grand Turk, and this is the cruise line there. And what we found there was that the arrow shows that every time a boat comes into that dock, the propellers wash up a cloud of sediment that is killing reefs up to 1.5 kilometers down current. In the Turks and Caicos, we had to transplant thousands of those corals were being killed by the propeller wash. So there's going to be clouds of sediment washing down current from the side of the cruise ship port. So that's going to be a consideration. There's also going to be some warm water introduced, which introduces a bit of a threat of bleaching. But the other issue is, it's not mentioned here in the EIA. They don't say where the sand's going to go, wash away, but they don't say where the sewage is going to go. And they're proposing to bring in thousands of people a day. That's going to produce a lot of sewage. And according to the EIA, it's all going to be magically treated so there's no environmental impact. And so the question is, where is that fluid effluent going to go? And the answer is it's going to go into the groundwater, into those very pristine migratory bird sites, the salt ponds. Now, right next door, the next island over in Abaco is the site of Baker's Bay. And that's the only place in the world where they put in huge developments of this kind, where the reefs were studied before the development went in. And I was one of 3 different groups to study those reefs before that development. They were in excellent condition. There were no coral diseases. There were no weedy, harmful algae blooms. And as soon as they dredged up the mangroves to put in a mega yacht marina, as soon as they put in the golf course and started dumping fertilizer, even though the developers promised that no nutrients would get into the water, it would all be recycled on land. As a matter of fact, as soon as those things went in, as soon as those fertilizers and sewage, we began seeing weedy algae smother and kill the reef. We began seeing coral diseases spread and killed off the reef habitat, and it destroyed the fish nursery for the lobsters and the conch and the fisheries for the guanacos fishermen. So this is something that the effect of the nutrients, we see every place where we put nutrients. And so they don't say what's going to happen to the nutrients in their sewage. That's a very serious issue. But if we look at Lighthouse Point, the fact that they're going to dump sand on both sides, that there's going to be a huge amount of sewage that's going to be dumped there. And given the fact the currents are washing up both sides of Eleuthera, whatever damage is done there from nutrients or from sedimentation is not only going to wipe out the most pristine and important reef in Eleuthera, it's going to affect all of South Eleuthera down current, because everything else is down current from it. So this is really a unique site. It deserves the very highest protection. It's one of those Bahamian reefs that is priceless, and I hope you can save it. Thank you very much.
I am just trying to get my video back. Thank you very much, Tom. Sorry, I'm still not getting my video back. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate your care that you've taken to produce that for this campaign. Next up, we have Jacob Scheer. I also have known Jacob for over 20 years. Jacob is an environmental lawyer and former director of global advocacy with the Natural Resources Defense Council. Jacob has been a global environmental advocate for more than 40 years. During his career with the Natural Resources Defense Council, he served as director of the Global Strategy and Advocacy, Director of the International Program, Director of Biogems Initiative, and a senior attorney with nuclear and international programs. Jacob initiated NRDC's work on climate change with the creation of the Atmospheric Protection Initiative in 1989 and has worked on climate change issues for more than 3 decades. He has served as a senior advisor to the Stop Disney Last Chance campaign for the past 2 years. Jacob will be providing a review of the report from the Woods Hole Group on climate change. Here you go. Thanks, Jacob. You're on, Jacob.
Okay, 1 sec. I'll be with. Okay, I appreciate that. 1 second. All right, let me get this. Let me just get my slide up, and then I'll. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Good evening and happy Earth Day to everyone. 1 second, let me get sorry. Okay, happy Earth Day. Really want to thank everybody for coming. And I wanted to start off with a few words about Professor Lisa Benjamin, who had intended to speak this evening on climate change. Many of you know Lisa. She's a Bahamian law professor who's now teaching at Lewis and Clark Law School. Sadly, Lisa's father passed away a few days ago. She's on her way back to the Bahamas and understandably cannot be with us tonight. So please join me in expressing our condolences to Lisa and her family. As Dinah Baer mentioned last week, like many Americans of my generation, I grew up admiring and indeed loving Disney. Some of my earliest memories are of Disney's nature documentaries that I saw on the big screen in theaters and sometimes on the Disney TV show, which appeared every Sunday night. That exposure sparked my lifelong interest in wildlife and the environment. Thus, it's been rather jarring for me personally to see Disney in such a different light here, as its cruise line appears eager to rush ahead with its plans at Lighthouse Point based on a seriously flawed environmental review. When I began working with the Bahamian environmental groups in the Last Chance campaign, I didn't think about this controversy as one involving climate change. However, that perception changed after Hurricane Dorian, a powerful storm that lingered over the country at the start of September 2019. It devastated Abaco and Grand Bahama and impacted people throughout the Bahamas. At the time, Bahamian Environment Minister Ferreira agreed that the Bahamas is in a national climate crisis and said Bahamian officials were committed to combating its effects. My own work on climate change started more than 30 years ago. And we used to talk at the Natural Resources Defense Council about, quote, stopping global warming, unquote. But sadly, we've missed our chance. I personally never thought I'd see climate change in my own lifetime. And now the best we can do is to constrain further warming and to cope with the reality of a changing climate and rising sea. And today, President Biden is Environment Summit and has invited 3 other presidents and prime ministers to participate. This show of national leadership is important, but as former UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon said repeatedly, climate change is a crisis which requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. So an issue at Lighthouse Point is also Disney's responsibility to address climate risks. Disney is not only an iconic American multinational corporation with great power and reach, but arguably, particularly with its recent acquisition of National Geographic, one of the planet's most important communicators about nature and the environment. So I was disappointed to see that Disney was not listed among 300 US companies that wrote to President Biden last week to urge strong action on climate change. The Last Chance for Lighthouse Point campaign has been disappointed as Disney has repeatedly failed to respond meaningfully to our request after Hurricane Dorian that their EIA seriously consider climate change and sea level rise. And I frankly was surprised when Dr. Mark Penning of Disney said at our meeting in March 2020 that he viewed climate change, quote, as a political issue, unquote. So let me go ahead, let's take a look at some slides. So the reality is, for the Bahamas, climate change is real. In fact, a 2018 report by Climate Central for the Inter-American Development Bank found the Bahamas to be the most vulnerable nation in the Caribbean to sea level rise. The Bahamians contribute relatively little carbon pollution, but could bear a disproportionate share of the burdens of dealing with the anticipated more frequent and intensive storms. Tonight, the campaign is releasing a review of the Disney's EIA undertaken by the Woods Hole Group. A copy of their detailed letter is being posted in the chat right now. It's quite technical. I urge all of you to download it and read it. And what I would like to do quickly now is just to touch on a few of the points in their letter. Okay. All right, I got to get the next slide. Okay. The Woods Hole Group is a commercial consulting firm that generally works for governments and corporations. Waterkeeper Alliance retained their team of experts to review the adequacy of the EIA, particularly in regard to climate risk and sea level rise. We asked them to provide to the campaign, Disney and the public, their judgments as to whether or not the EIA met the best practices in the industry and were commensurate with the kind of commitment that Disney has made to environmental stewardship. Okay, well, next slide. Okay. All right, and on this slide, basically, this is sort of the bottom line. The Woods Hole Group took a look at the EIA in depth and found that there was a need for additional information, analysis, and clarification with regard to coastal processes, sea level rise, storm surge, resilient design, water quality, and greenhouse gas emissions. Their view was that the impact assessment for these subject areas was either not sufficiently detailed or site specific. Let me just say a word about sea level rise, and this is an excerpt from the letter. The EIA looked at a 1 foot rise in sea level relative to 2017. The Woods Hole Group found that that was the lower end of possible sea level rise projections over the stated design life of the project, and made the point. One second. And made the one second. Whoops, sorry. And made the point that the EIA should do much more in terms of presenting a range of potential sea level rise scenarios over the project design life overlaid with the development plan. And so you can see here from these maps that the very quick preliminary view that it appears that part of the South Family Beach area, south of Shad Pond and White Pond are particularly vulnerable to future tidal inundation over the stated life of the project. The next slide deals with the issue of storm surge. As Dr. Groh pointed out, this is an area that is potentially affected by hurricanes. The EIA points out is that a significant vulnerability point, which impacts every 2.8 years and a direct hit every 9.57 years on average. Once again, what the Woods Hole Group found is that if you actually look at the storm surge from Hurricane Andrew, that generated a 23-foot storm surge at Lighthouse Point, and that potentially could overwhelm the project area as shown. And Woods Hole Group makes the point that careful consideration of storm-related vulnerabilities is critical to making planning and design decisions in areas that are exposed to hurricanes. Next point is about greenhouse gas emissions. The EIA states that the project will not have a quote material impact on climate change. Estimates the project's related greenhouse gas emissions are about 3,100 metric tons per year. But there's absolutely no detail provided to either substantiate this estimate or to put into context to evaluate the significance of its impact And it's really unclear exactly what emissions are included or not included in this figure. So, okay, next. All right, so this is the summary. And let me just read this for people. In summary, based on the review of those EIA elements with aligned with the Woodhull Group's expertise and their experience preparing similar environmental documents for state and federal applications in the US, we conclude that more detailed and site-specific data analysis are required to complete this EIA. Without additional information, it is not possible to evaluate or substantiate the claims the proponent has made in the document as submitted on March 21st. So let me just conclude by sharing just one or two thoughts with you, and that would be that the heading here of Planet Possible is something that I received in an email today from Disney, and it sort of calls us to the point that we're to I think reflects kind of the sentiment of the Bahamian professor of human geography, Adele Thomas, who has repeatedly said, when it comes to climate change in the Bahamas, the time for business as usual is over. And so if Disney is to be truly environmentally responsible, it cannot continue to downplay or ignore the realities of a changing climate and rising seas. But we think that this Earth Day, that Disney still has an opportunity to do something truly transformational at Lighthouse Point and to provide leadership our planet needs to assure a brighter, more sustainable future, not only for Lutherans and Bahamians, but for all of us. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Jacob. We're going to open up the meeting for discussion now. Feel free to go through the reactions icon on Zoom, bottom toolbar to raise your hand with any questions for the experts or comments you might have on the adequacy of the draft EIA consideration of oceans and climate change. In the interest of giving everyone a chance to speak, please limit your comments and questions to 2 minutes. You can take a 30-second follow-up on your answer to your question. We will focus solely on the adequacy of Disney's EIA, and we apologize in advance, but we reserve the right to mute anyone whose comments are outside the scope of the meeting, abusive, or otherwise inappropriate. While we are here, I'd like to ask Katerina McKinney to give us a quick overview on the issue of the marine protected area and how that whole concept came about in terms of the protection of not only Lighthouse Point, but the other sites that are listed in that document. Katerina?
Hi, Sam. Hi, everyone. So yes, Lighthouse Point and the marine area of approximately 19,000 acres off the southern tip of Eleuthera was included in the list of 43 sites, priority sites to be included in the network of marine protected areas that would expand the Bahamas's network to 20%. This work was done as part of a project called the Bahamas Protected Project that was a collaboration between the Bahamas National Trust, the Nature Conservancy, BRIEF, and working with partners throughout the country. So really looking at an ecological gap analysis of looking at targets for protection, and then also collaborating with people on the ground, getting a lot of input from locals on what they cared about, what they wanted to see protected. And so of all the parts, all the areas around the Bahamas, Lighthouse Point, the marine area around Lighthouse Point was one of these priority areas. And I shared the link in the chat for that marine protection plan, and you can look at page 84. The document specifically recognizes that local communities and conservation groups have gathered together and asked for an alternative, for a sustainable development alternative for Lighthouse Point and for that area. Prioritizing the creation of jobs and economic benefits to the depressed communities in South Eleuthera, and recognizing that low environmental impact developments can provide much more economic benefits to South Eleuthera. So looking at other alternatives for employment and entrepreneurial opportunities that at the same time safeguard the ecological value of the area. So I do encourage you to have a look at that whole document. Again, it's in the chat, and specifically look at page 84 and 85.
Thank you very much, Katerina. I noticed that we have Dave Phillip on the chat, on the call today, and I was wondering if he would speak to the issue of bonefish in the area. Dave? Dave? Can we unmute Dave, please?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I was here. I can probably try to start video. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, and I'd like to say a couple of things. You can all hear me? Sam,
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes?
I can hear you, yep.
Okay, great. I think, a lot can be gleaned about the EIA simply by looking at some of the glaring details, So start just with the 3-paragraph general statement. You can see a lot. So, for example, in the second paragraph, it really describes what the EIA should be, but in fact, the EIA itself falls woefully short of all of that. And so when you look at all of those things, it's abundantly clear to me, and now I'm talking just from a fisheries and marine resources standpoint, I would never try to claim any knowledge or expertise with birds or terrestrial plants or anything like that. But as far as just the fisheries goes, it's abundantly clear to me that Disney's, in-house, their animal and conservation experts, as they say, and the people that they got to work for the EIA, really, there is no experience in marine areas. There's no fisheries ecology. There's no fish biology or fisheries conservation. And that becomes, glaring throughout the EIA. As an example, the executive summary, which is 10, 20 something pages long, the word fish is used 3 times. The fish section is actually a line and a half. So that's essentially the details that have gone into this. And it is just woefully short of being anything remotely sounding like an EIA as far as the marine resources go. They come out also in their statement that says that the project will not impact any marine or terrestrial biodiversity. And there's an issue right there, because they are obviously assuming that one metric of measuring loss of biodiversity is simply the extirpation of local species. And yeah, that's one thing, and monitoring the number of species is another thing. And that's essentially all that this EIA is just simple lists and lists and lists of different species. But that ignores the synthesis and actually injecting biology and ecology into the whole study system. So they're not looking at population biology, community ecology, how the impacts of this project will interact with these different species and the processes of spawning, recruitment, et cetera. So for example, and Tom just nailed it when he was talking about the aggregation, the grouper aggregations. In the EIA, they make a claim that there are no spawning aggregations and the project will have no impact on spawning aggregations. And they cite our bonefish work, but actually they miscite our bonefish work. The point of the value of that one piece of property, as Tom showed, is that it is the northern entrance to the Exuma Sound. And the Exuma Sound is this huge dead-end canyon with big gyre systems in it that entrain larvae. And therefore, lots of fish have evolved, lots of species and these populations have evolved to migrate, sometimes hundreds of miles, to get into that Exuma Sound, spawn off the deep reef points so that their larvae can be held in gyres pelagically and therefore away from predators, and can develop out there to repopulate and be entrained to have some sort of self-recruitment issues. All of the fish coming from the north and east side of Eleuthera swim right down that coastline around that point, right where Tom was showing, and go into the system. They will go through, they'll have to swim through 28,000 swimmers a week through the pier and all of that. So even though the assessment says that, you know, there's like 5 acres of impacted seabed, which I guess is the shadow of the pier, they say that's the only impacted area. But in fact, all of that disturbance will create major problems for fish trying to enter the Exuma Sound. And we know that because for bonefish, at least, and there is a bonefish aggregation right around the Lighthouse Point, and in Eleuthera, South Eleuthera, there are only 2 aggregations. There's probably only 50 aggregation spawning sites for bonefish throughout the entire Bahamas. So each one of these is extremely valuable. But they're just a good example, and one that should strike home for Disney, is that bonefish guides from Grand Bahama and Abaco have said for years that there was a huge spawning aggregation off of Gorda Key. Gorda Key was purchased and taken over by Disney some years ago and turned into Castaway Key, which is another similar project, very close to what Lighthouse Point is supposed to become. And now there is absolutely no evidence that there are any bonefish spawning anywhere near Gorda Key. So it's just the level of disturbance that comes through construction and daily operation when they say that the beaches could have enough sand to hold 20,000 people. There wouldn't be a bonefish and probably a spawning grouper within miles that would be willing to come within miles of that. And they just won't swim out into deeper water because that's where all the predators are. So they will not go to that spawning area. So to say that there is no impact from this, they're missing the bigger picture. They're looking at a list and saying that the list won't change in 10 years because you can still find a blue tang and you'll still find a French grunt, et cetera. That's almost meaningless information. What will happen is that the production of major fisheries will be impacted tremendously. And so the economic benefits, whatever they might be, will be offset by the broad scale economic detriments created by the lack of production of these economically important fishes. And the fish that are produced in Exuma Sound spill over into many of the, or if all, probably all of the Bahamian islands that are on the Great Bahama Bank, and potentially even go across to the Little Bahama Bank, et cetera. So that's what that's where I think the EIA is absolutely missing the point here. The level of biology that went into producing this is so low that it makes all of the conclusions essentially meaningless. There needs to be some really serious fisheries experts to make comments on what this impact would be. Tom laid it out, gave a great example of what will happen, to the grouper spawning aggregation that is undoubtedly off that point right there. So, I think that's basically what kind of I wanted to say, that, they have cherry picked certain things from some published studies, et cetera, misquoted others, and basically have missed the synthesis. And it just shows glaringly. And the bottom line too, as they say right in their first paragraph in their three paragraph introduction there, that this project will work great as long as an appropriate environmental plan that protects everything is put in place. And yet that environmental plan, which is probably a pipe dream in the first place, is nowhere to be seen anyway. So the point of what I would like to say is that to make a reasonable assessment on what the true impact is, there may need to be some studies beforehand to see where the dangers really lie, because they're just firing off. There will be no negative impacts without actually any data to support it. So I guess
Thank you
that's
so much,
kind of my
Dave. I really appreciate your comments, and I appreciate you having looked at the EIA and understanding what needs to be done. There was a question in the chat from Azalita asking, have hurricanes or rising sea levels affected Coco Key or any areas in the Bahamas where Disney operates to date? Disney operates at Gorda Key or Castaway Key, which is in Abaco, and I personally do not have any information about how Gorda Key might have been affected by any storm surge. So there's another hand up, Dr. Bentley Higgs, if you can unmute yourself and make your comment. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Bentley Higgs. Appreciate being invited to this call. Basically, I'm a PhD in civil environmental engineering and with research experience in sustainable solid waste management. I'm happy to hear that discussions are ongoing about the Lighthouse Point. It potentially could be a good project, but it needs, as we all have seen, more precise planning and data collection in order to make this, beneficial for the country and the people exist and the environment. One of the things that from the meeting that was held with Disney and DEPP on April 5th, and I was a part of that meeting, and they made a presentation based on, I guess, their EIA. I saw that there was, or heard and did some reading, that there's a lack of lack of gathering of information of how solid waste is handled on the island and solutions in which they will implement once the project is laid out. So and I posed a question to the Disney crew, and basically they didn't have a concise response, and I mean, other folks on the chat basically saw that they have no plan. They have no sustainable solid waste management plan, and that's, once you start bringing in more people to the island, that automatically is going to generate more waste, and you need to be able to handle that, or it's going to end up in the sea. And as we all discussed, it's going to mess up the reef, it's going to mess up the aquatic life, etc. So, and even the actual landscape. So I think there needs to be an in-depth study on, to develop a sustainable solid waste management plan. And I think at the current state the EIA is in, it does not cover that in-depth needed for the level of confidence for this project to proceed. So that's my I guess my 5 cents.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and that's an ongoing concern, definitely, for the impact to the saltwater ponds and to the marine environment and all the animals that depend on pristine areas to live in. Can we contact you and get more information from your side of things about this project? We'd love to speak to you more. If you can drop information in the chat, we'd really appreciate that.
Yes, I'll put my contact information and email address. Yes.
Thank you. So we had a question from Kelly Arkles. What happened to the Bahamas commitment to the Caribbean Challenge Initiative? My understanding is that all participating Caribbean countries committed to protecting 20% of their coastline by 2020. Did they achieve this? wouldn't the protection of Lighthouse Point be a part of their commitment, considering the importance of this area to all topics being presented this evening? Casuarina, would you like to quickly respond to that, please?
Hi, Sam. Yeah, absolutely. So the Bahamas was actually one of the countries. This was a broad-reaching initiative that started over 10 years ago to reach 20% marine protected areas by the year 2020. A number of other countries have reached or exceeded that. And it's not just setting up protected areas, it's also proper management of protected areas. And there's some tremendous examples from the Cayman Islands of what they've done and how it's really supporting the Caribbean Challenge and establishing marine protected areas. This is supporting fisheries, tourism, and long-term sustainability of our island nations. So this marine protection plan that I referenced earlier is the process that the Bahamas has been taking to reach that Caribbean Challenge commitment. And that's why those 43 sites were identified, proposed to government with a lot of public input, a lot of scientific input. And these are the recommendations for the areas that need to be set up as marine protected areas in the country in order for us to meet this Caribbean Challenge.
So
It hasn't
Casuarina,
happened yet.
can I ask
And
you
we are
quickly,
hoping.
what is the delay in terms of us accepting those 43 sites as protected areas? It obviously has to come from government. Is there any word from them in terms of why they have not moved to do that?
My understanding is that the go-ahead was given at a cabinet level, but they still haven't been designated yet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's a question for Dr. Higgs from Azalita, and this may be the last question because we're at 5:02. So Dr. Higgs, if you could answer quickly. Would a solid waste facility create odor into the environment for the residents who are living close by? Dr. Higgs, can you answer that? Maybe Dr. Higgs left us.
I see he already responded in the chat.
Oh, okay, you're ready. Okay.
Yeah, I was typing a response in the chat when I glimpsed the chat. So yeah, I sent a response, but it all depends on their strategic plan and how they plan to handle the waste. But if you do the traditional landfilling, yes, there could be some odor expelled or emitted. But with a proper plan, that odor could be brought to either very negligible or not even noticeable, or might not even exist if you have a good running operation.
Right. Okay. But we don't know what that operation is going to be just yet.
Yeah, they don't have that outlined. So yeah, basically they're just planning on having accumulated waste, and they mentioned in the EIA that they're depending on the government, and right now all governmental sites are poorly managed. And I know the last time I was there, I was in Easter, and all of them were basically on fire. So yeah, so me and my partner, because I work with Sperling Hansen Associates, we have visited the island, and we're working with an advocate for the environment to put together a strategic management plan for the entire island once we get the go-ahead, the financial go-ahead to support that development of that plan. So we see the need, especially from all the way from north to south. It's the same story, right? From Harbor Island all the way down to the Lighthouse Point. So yeah, we see that there's a need.
Thank you, Dr. Higgs. Okay, so we are at basically 3 minutes left to the meeting. If there's anybody who has one last question Otherwise, we're going to say thank you very much, and Rashima will say goodnight to you and happy Earth Day. Any other questions for us before we head out?
If
Okay.
there are no other questions, I would like to thank you all very much for joining this meeting and engaging in this important issue. Please stay tuned for more information about potential additional public consultations hosted by our partners. I want to remind you again that Dr. Thomas did tell us that the corals near Lighthouse Point are among some of the deep reefs in this region, and they should be protected. And also Jacob Scher reminded us that we need to have exact numbers on the percentage or the amount of carbon emissions that Disney proposed to produce. Once again, this is a major decision for the future of Eleuthera and the Bahamas. At issue is the responsibility of a major multinational and a small island state to live up to their commitments to protect our shared environment for future generations. I would like to provide another reminder to submit your comments by May 7th to the government and or Disney. Information to submit comments is being dropped in the chat right now, so please grab those before you leave the meeting. And you can also find ways to submit your comments at stopdisney.com. Thank you once again. Good night and enjoy the rest of your Earth Day, restoring our Earth. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night. Good night, all.
Good night.